very privileged to introduce Dr. Jerry Braza.
Thank you. Such a warm welcome. I think, David, it's working. I think we got it made. Thank you so much. It's a tough act after lunch. See, in Buddhism, we say, try to be awake. For me, that's in the afternoon, a cup of coffee and a nap. That partly helps. I've been honored to be asked to present at your seminar series. I was saying to a few friends I'd like to apply for it, but it would probably, I'm not sure if I'd be dead by the time I get in. It's so popular. So I'll just enjoy presenting at this seminar series and talk about a few things that are dear to me. Every time I do a presentation, I try to do a check with myself. And basically, what I will be presenting today is where I see myself in this practice of mindfulness and how I've come to this place. And I'll share some personal stories, and I'll use a Socratic dialogue method. I know I'm not supposed to engage in question and answers during the first 40 to 45 minutes, but I will ask you little questions to engage you into this topic. It's one that I learned, I think, many years ago when I found myself as a young person going to graduate school and always being in a hurry. At the time, they were doing research on the type A behavior. Have you heard about that? Yeah. Well, that seemed to fit me. And along the way, I was struggling and going to graduate school, being a young parent of 2 children, trying to keep a relationship together, do all the university things I needed to do, and I was running marathons, and then having some occasional chest pains. Not appropriate for a 32-year-old, 31-year-old. Couldn't understand it, so I saw one of the top cardiologists at the University of Utah where I was teaching, and he ran all the tests to know that I was only suffering from anxiety. And the palpitations in my heart would cause these symptoms. So at that time, I started on my own because I was always curious to study about mindfulness. It came up in the Buddhist literature. In fact, the concept I'll be sharing is 2,600 years old. But today, it is a word that has popped up like fast food restaurants. You have mindfulness this and mindfulness that. Mindful car washes. Mindful whatever it is. A lot of people are using it sometimes appropriately. And in fact, people like John Kabat-Zinn started the studies many years ago, and now there's literally thousands of studies. And I'll try to give you a summary of it along the way. This is not going to be research boring. But it relates to our lives. I take the things that I see common to our generation. I think we're in that same age group. Now, you said I traveled a lot around different places. Yes, I have. My daughter works for the World Health Organization. I go to see her in Geneva and do work there and presentations and other places. But when I go to Alaska, you can't count Russia because I never saw it. I never saw it. So you can't count that one, Ingrid. Anyways, let me move on. Thank you, Tony Peterson, where are you, for helping to coordinate this. I appreciate the communication and helping me along the way. And then I met with Lester a while back. I mean, they were so concerned about this. Lester and I had to have 2 cups of coffee to figure it out. But along the way, I got to know him better. And then Ingrid and I had a cup of coffee last week, so she wanted to make sure she got to know me better, so she would do a nice job as she did in the introduction. But you know, that happens with me. As the older I get, my wife Kathleen says, "How much time are you going to spend for that Willamette presentation? Haven't you done these kind of things before?" But the strange thing is, I think the older we all get, our minds are not always a clear blue sky, right? It's harder to stay focused. And that's one of the benefits of mindfulness. And I think it's helping me. Well, you'll see during my presentation if it is or isn't. I may get carried away a little bit. So I am going to play with this. So this piece, mindful or mindful. I'll start with a few questions. And I don't know if those lights have to be off. Does it comes in pretty good? Either way, if it helps, it's good. So I came up with a few questions for this crowd. This is not a dialogue time. Do you ever find yourself busy and in a hurry? Any hands? Okay. I'm in the right room. Okay, another question. Is your mind full because of worries and responsibilities? How many of you wake up at night and start, well, I have to get up to go to the bathroom. You know how that is. and half hour later, I'm still thinking about this Willamette presentation or something. Not really, but other things in my life. You know, I have the full catastrophe. I have a wife. I have a family. I have a son, a daughter, grandchildren. As Zorba the Greek said, the full catastrophe. I'm a man. I have a family. I have a job. I do all of these things. But it's okay. Now, I see it as a blessing, not bad. But these are things that cause us to worry, right? Because we love people. We're concerned about people. We have losses. As a Buddhist Dharma teacher, I do weddings and funerals. Well, I can assure you I'm doing more funerals because 2 people from our group died in the last 2 months. We have a meditation group. And this is ongoing. My brother died a year ago. So I start to think, if not now, when, right? This is a very important point. Another question is, do you recognize that these may separate yourself, all these worries, from those you love and those you care about? You find yourself preoccupied. Well, those are some questions to begin with. I want to tell you about an experience that I observed recently. I was in a restaurant, my wife and I having a nice dinner, and I saw a young man, maybe about 30-ish, with his daughter. They were having dinner. And he was checking his cell phone out. And she was asking him, Daddy, what's that? What's that? When are we going to eat? What does that word say? For 30 minutes, back and forth, he answered with a one word, and he continued to look at his cell phone. Now we can, as older adults, we can complain how bad it's getting, all those things like my parents did when I was watching too much TV and all those crazy things. But the reality is it is separating people. But I felt a moment of sadness. Why? Because I triggered back to when I was a young dad, and I'd read bedtime stories to my children. And because I had all the demands I talked about earlier, I would skip pages. And they would always catch me. But this notion of always being in a hurry and not being present for what is going on has become, in a way, an epidemic. So we see this, mindful or mindful. These are some things that we will look at. So that created a dissonance in me, and it helped me to start searching and discovering more about this topic. So I'm going to have some introductory slides. I'm going to go over some of the mechanisms and some of the things that I have learned recently. When I first learned about mindfulness, it was pretty simple. I thought, just breathing in, breathing out, stay in the present moment. And I thought, if I can learn that, that would be helpful. And it was. But what I discovered was, along the way, that this was not only affecting my body, today it affects our brain. And I'll talk about neuroplasticity of the brain, how it changes our brain structure, literally, because of our worries, because of our fear, because of our ability to live in the present moment. So we have in our life this mind-brain relationship. So our mind is offering our thoughts, our insights, our intention, our focused attention. And then we look at relationships, and then we look at the brain. So it's that combination between the mind and the body which is influencing our brain all the time. So right now, the interaction is going on. This is old stuff, but it really, to me, is always fresh because I always learn something new about it. So what I'm thinking right now is affecting my body and eventually is affecting my brain. So in the middle of the night, you're having trouble falling back to sleep because you're worried about something. That is coming from your mind, from your thinking, coming from your feelings that are interactive and affected by those thoughts. So I had 2 hip surgeries in the last 7 years, and I was having all this pain, and then I had the diagnosis, and it was bone to bone, and the doctor said, "I'm going to do surgery." I used to be a marathon runner. I said, "Oh, my goodness, that's it. No more running, no more walking. My life is going to completely change," because I started thinking about it. I started feeling about it. My body was activated by it, and it wasn't very good. Whatever the thing is in your life, there's something happening between that mind and your body, and now we know that's actually influencing our brain in positive ways or negative ways. So that's what we're going to try to look at in this program today. Well, we talk about stress, which is this pushing us away from equilibrium. We are meant to be equanimous. When I work with a recovery group, they say, "Jerry, why don't we start Equanimous Anonymous?" I like that idea, Equanimous Anonymous. You're not too high, not too low. I'll get more into that, but what happens when you go too high or when you go too low? You get too depressed, or you're always up there on another plane. We have to keep some equanimity, and I taught stress management classes for 20 years. It became so boring because I said there's got to be something deeper. Well, the deeper part had to do with mindfulness as an avenue, as an opportunity to look into what is going on with the brain. We'll talk about that later. The consequences, as we see here, are many. If you've had any of these health problems, anxiety, depression, digestive problems, it's not a cause-effect or relationship, but headaches, heart disease, sleep problems, weight gain, memory, concentration impairments. This is what is happening when we have this prolonged periods of stress. That is not really new information, but it's something to remind us of. Now, there's a new area today that is very significant. A few years back, I started to do some work with veterans. Not on a regular basis, but I started to discover of the trauma that occurs in people's lives. We know of PTSD. We think about it normally within the veteran population, but we know it's much greater than that. Just an overview, I know somebody that has had 2 parents and both were alcoholics. And imagine her as a little girl trying to keep peace in the family when every night it was really like a war zone. Her parents were arguing, yelling, screaming at each other. That is as bad as being, it's all relative, but as bad as being in a war zone. These things are happening all the time. Trauma. So we talk about the big T, the car accidents, the assaults, the violence, the physical trauma, natural disasters, child abuse, death, war zones. I'll tell you about a friend who, I thought she was in his class. Her name is Ann Martin. She's a therapist. She does a technique to help people who have been traumatized. She works with children in different parts of the world, and she does volunteer work wherever there's a war zone. She teaches them how to create a refuge in themselves and transform some of those traumas into a positive place. Well, those are the big T's. We are fortunate if we haven't had those in our lives. But I can't imagine anyone in this room not having any of the big T's. Now, all of these things are cumulative. They add up. So a vet friend who stayed at our home, he was giving talks around the country. He was in a war zone in Vietnam, and his platoon was so angry because half of them died, so they killed these children in the school by putting poison in the food. You can't think, who would do that, right? This guy was severely traumatized. He now became a Buddhist Dharma teacher. He goes around the world. He transformed it. Now, it's possible to transform. Yet, to this day, he says to me, he stayed at our home a couple times, he'd be up all night. But 40 years later, every hour, he'd sleep an hour, get up. And he's had the best therapy, he has the best practice he can have. Sometimes it's so deep that it causes so much pain that it's really hard to change. And we have the little T's. You can see these here, routine surgeries, minor car accidents. And then the cumulative T's. And those such as poverty. How fortunate we are. I live on West Salem, and I walk around the park, and there's a big homeless village. A couple hundred people live on the west side of the Willamette River every night. I saw a man my age. He had very old looking, and he was carrying a cart of wood about a month ago back to their place so they could have a fire at night. Imagine what it's like. They're at the bottom of the survival thing of Maslow's hierarchy. But these things of racism, witnessing, homelessness, you witness it. I'll be in Alaska working with the State Nurses Association, and what is it like? Any of you been in healthcare during your life? You have an accumulative vision of what that was like. You witnessed many violent situations, ERs, trauma, hospice. My wife worked as a thanatologist and worked in the world of grief. That trauma, along with some things that happen naturally in families, create secondary trauma. It's hard to be out of it, and all of us can be in that category. If we've had any traumas in our early life, they're activated. Why is it that you think that some people have a minor thing happen to them and they go off the scale? They just can't contain themselves. That piece somehow excited them and reminded them of something that happened earlier in their life. So there's a historical traumas that happen. Now, what we want to do is develop a resilient zone. This is the natural zone of the nervous system. Hopefully at this time you can be in that place of resilience. This is what we do with children. School children need to learn how to be resilient. When bullied, when in a challenging home environment, how can they come back? There are resiliency skills that children are learning today in what we call mindful schools. And these are wonderful opportunities. Now, every one of you has a resilient zone. Our goal in the resilient zone is because if we get too high or too low, we get out of that zone, and our nervous system gets agitated, and we get aroused. Do you ever have an argument with somebody? It just doesn't go away, right? You're there. I've had arguments with some people, and that doesn't happen very much anymore because I don't allow myself to go there anymore. I breathe, I stop, and I try not to react. That's a way to stay in the zone of resilience. But what happens? I used to remember feeling just like I went through a car wash. Just bang, bang. It was so hurtful because the body was influenced, not physically, but it takes on the blows of the emotions, the feelings, the anger. All of those things are influenced. So our goal is to stabilize our nervous system. So this is basically what we're attempting to do. If you're interested, the parasympathetic nervous system is a natural, relaxed state. So we'll learn after the break today some strategies that can be helpful. I'll allude to them. But a simple breath can help a person. If I can just take an in-breath and an out-breath, I can start to stabilize. When we react and go over the top, get angry, our sympathetic or our stressful nervous system is influenced. I always say, a good quality to determine a person's mental health is how are they able to stay in that zone of resilience, or are they reacting a lot? You get what I'm saying? It's knee-jerk. Something happens. Car cuts in front of them. Somebody says something. They become defensive and almost automatically go into a fight or flight, which is a natural way that we have been developed to be. So this doesn't mean that we don't go into the depth of life. I always believe that when there's sadness, you have to experience it fully. When there's anger, you should experience it fully before you project it on other people in a physical way. These feelings have to be experienced. A famous family therapist, you ever hear of Virginia Satir? She worked in this type of therapy, and one of her statements was she could tell in a family if there's a level of congruence. Congruence is what's inside comes outside. Am I hiding things from other people? Am I open with my spouse? Am I open with the intimate people in my life? It's a lot easier than to resist it. Resistance causes us to go into a low state where the nervous system is affected in a negative way. Okay. So here are a few things that need to be considered. Trauma means too much too fast, or too little, or too much too long. Too much too fast. So like, say, there's an accident. I bet some of you have been traumatized by accidents in your life, automobile accidents. You can't get it out of your mind. You can feel it. It's still when you get to that intersection or you go to that place. I have nurses that talk about working with burn patients and how anytime they get into a situation where there's another burn or event, it has a whole physiological bodily response. So that would be, it's triggering something old. But some of these are major things that happen in a short period of time. But too long, they continue to happen. So the person who has alcoholic parents, there was 10, 15 years of childhood destroyed by the parents who were arguing. People that live in zones of war and hostility, people that live in places where there's a lot of anger and a lot of fighting and things that go on. We even can find this in our own culture. So every day we're experiencing troubling reactions: anxiety, edginess, irritability, depression, sadness, exhaustion, and not feeling ourselves. Do you get that? Do you have that feeling when you're not yourself? That's a sign about some of these things. Difficult memories may be stored as memories, and we are then becoming more reactive. So trauma and stress combined. Trauma today is probably, for me, it's been the most enlightening word, because I often see, we have retreats, for example, in monasteries. We go to the Trappist Abbey. You ever been there? It's a quiet place. I love that place. And I was in Arizona at the Franciscan Renewal Center, and we had a retreat there. It was a quiet, beautiful place. But when people go into a place like this and they're there for 5 days of silence, they come to the teachers and they say, I don't know why, I just don't feel myself. Something's happening with me. And I explore that a little further, and I discover that it's not the retreat, it's silence. What do we do to keep silence away? We keep busy. We work harder because we want to avoid something. But if one learns to stop and to be quiet, that's a skill I'll talk about, these things will come up in our consciousness. And what's happening in that moment then, they're triggering into these moments that have happened in the past and how these traumas continue. Okay, so let's see. I'm getting this thing here. This is one of my favorite parts of the brain. I'm not going to talk a lot about it. I'm not a neuroscientist. But think about this. This is proof of what happens in the anterior cingulate cortex. But basically, it lights up during meditation, mindfulness, and focused attention, being on task. In long-term meditators, this area enlarges in size. I've always been interested about the Tibetan monks. There's a study at the University of Wisconsin where they've taken these monks. You ever hear of the 10,000 hour theory? If you do anything for 10,000 hours, you're going to be pretty good at it. Well, Tibetan monks are full-time Zen, right? 24/7. They're not thinking about it. That's their job. They're practicing coming back all the time. Well, these people, their brains are significantly different. Significantly different. I have a good book for you right now. The Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. It just came out about a month ago. It's on joy. It's on joy. And these two men who have been Desmond Tutu in prison, South Africa, and Nelson Mandela, Dalai Lama from his country of Tibet, having challenges because they couldn't go home and all these things. And they had some of the most serious challenges in their life, yet they've learned to cultivate joy. I'm discovering, there's another book, it just came out 2 days ago, called Soul Friends. Soul Friends is about how important this early development is in all of us, because we need other people to help us, to support us along the way. We needed our parents, but let's pretend we came from a family where it wasn't very healthy. We didn't get the nurturance. The second chapter of the book talks about Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt became this incredible person, but her childhood was terrible. She wasn't nurtured in the way she should have. Yet there's hope for all of us when I read something like that. No matter what happened, we can transform our life if we come into contact with the right kind of soul friends, the people who can support us. If it didn't happen with your parents, you have to find groups of people. This can be a group of people where you come together and study and learn. And you can do this in other groups where you practice something that helps you. And it's deeper than chit-chat. It's talking about what's in your heart, what's in your soul, and sharing that with other people. This part of my life, this is what I love to do the most. I have a few male friends. Werner is one of them, Ingrid. We get together on occasion, maybe every 2 or 3 weeks. We don't talk about the Oregon Ducks. We don't talk about sports or anything. We talk about what's in our hearts, what's going on in our life, and how we best can support each other. We all need soul friends, people who can shine a light on us, so that we can keep this mindfulness going on for a long period of time. So that's what meditators look like. Posterior cingulate lights up when the mind wanders, when it's distracted. So if your mind wanders, this is happening to your brain. Multitasking, when you're craving, it gets quiet during meditation, during mindfulness. So this is, to me, really important information. There's so many parts of the brain now that they're discovering that change. So when I got into this field, I first thought, well, breathing is enough. It'll change my heart rate. It'll help me my physiology. We did biofeedback and show that the muscles are relaxing and the brain waves are changing. But now the brain can be changed, not only the brain waves. And that is what is happening in this area. So we're going to talk basically about how we rewire our brain. I would recommend any of the work of Rick Hanson. Rick Hanson wrote a book called The Buddha's Brain. And he's a neuroscientist. And he takes these ideas and how to change the brain. I'll just give you a couple examples here. The longer neurons fire. What fires together, wires together. The longer neurons fire together, the more they're going to change in a positive or negative way. So if I'm angry all the time, depressed all the time, sad all the time, and I stay in that place, it's going to, got to change it because I'm stitching more resilience if the right brain cells fire. Here, take care of the moments, and the years will take care of themselves. And that's why we have to learn to start to live with this moment-by-moment awareness. If I can live in the present moment, that will make a big difference. And then finally, my favorite recent term in the last couple of years, I use it in every talk I give, linger longer. I'll talk more about that, but linger longer means hanging out. Let's pretend. What have you noticed this past week? Tell me something beautiful you've seen in the last 3 or 4 days in Salem or anywhere. What? Blossoms. Okay. Anyone else? Just shout it out. Sunshine. Yes. I agree. Anyone else? Mount Hood. Oh, so beautiful. Yes. Next time you see that, and I noticed the moon is coming back out again. It's about halfway there to a full moon. Linger longer. Linger longer on something that is beautiful. You don't want to linger longer on negative things that are coming up. People ask me how I'm doing today. How's my life going? I say, well, it's a direct proportion to how much news I listen to. And it's been always that. It's always been that. It has always been that. I'm not making judgments. I'm just saying, if I listen to too much news in the past, I'm taking in too much, and most of it is negative. My opinion. And if I take in too much negative news, I ask myself, how do I feel after that? Do I feel good? Do I feel charged? Am I in equanimous zone, or is the sympathetic nervous system, the stressful part of my nervous system, agitated? So, Rick Hanson's latest book is Hardwiring Happiness. So I like this. A couple monks are chanting. What do you want? Mindfulness. When you want it? Now. Okay? What do you want? Mindfulness. When you want it? Now. Right? Let's do one more. What do you want? When you want it? Now. Okay, good. Okay, you're on board. We're good together so far. So what I've tried to say was there's a lot of stress in our world. We get out of balance because of our primitive, naturally good nervous system, which gets into fight or flight for reasons that we don't need to get there. For little things that bother us. And could read a news article and you get just disturbed. A woman came to a retreat recently, and I had interviews with her, and the first day she said, I've been hijacked by the news. I can't get it out of my mind. I'm so down, I don't feel good. I said, well, do what the Buddha did. Change the peg. That was the way they used to make wooden furniture. They put a wooden peg in it. Time of the Buddha, a piece of furniture broke, they would change the peg. The peg in this case is if I'm dealing with anger, hostility, fear, worries, I need to change it to something else. Talk about that as we go ahead. So mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in the present moment. So you can start doing that right now. Whatever you're thinking and doing, you just kind of bring yourself back. You always come back to what you're doing right now. You start to practice mindfulness because we're gonna talk about that. It has to be developed because our habit energy has been developed to be mindless. Mindless means to just go with whatever's going on. We allow ourselves to get carried away by thoughts, by feelings, by fears, by a lot of things. And so if we are able to pay attention, that's the first step. In the present moment, non-judgmentally. Any of you judge yourself? When I work with mental health workers, they all agree that non-judgmental awareness is very important. And they say that's an important ingredient that I have when I work with clients and people. That I say, what do you say to yourself? Are you your best friend or your worst enemy? How many times are we putting ourselves down or saying, oh, I said the wrong thing, or why did I do this, or why did I say that? It's something that is important. And it's an unfolding experience of the present moment, of that mindfulness part. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the benefits, and there's all kinds of research on this. So if you worry a lot, that means you ruminate. Any ruminators in here? Oh, got a few. I'm surprised I turned out to be who I am. My mother worried about everything. She lived to be 102, so she doesn't fit the paradigm. But she said, Gerald, don't do that. Why are you doing this? I was 50 years old, and I was teaching in Utah, and she said, Gerald, why do you want to move to Oregon? She said, Oregon. I said, Mom, it's a great opportunity. But she was worried about it. It's her way of being loving. Fear is not a good thing, though. But I think it kept her alive at some level. Reduce rumination. We stop our thinking. And this happens in a short meditation. I have people kind of count and think about what's going on. And then they meditate for about 5 to 10 minutes, mindful meditation, just following their breath. And I say, are you thinking less or thinking more? Almost invariably they say, thinking less. So that's a good thing. Because all those thoughts have a charge, right? If each of those thoughts represents a project or something that you have to do in your life, maybe something at our age is unfinished, gets in the way all the time. Unfinished business gets us to ruminate. Stress reduction. Well, so we want to keep in that zone of resilience where we're not having a fight or flight reaction. We want to boost our working memory. I wish I would have known this in college. I could have passed tests a lot easier because my mind was going in 1,000 directions. And I always had to bring it back. But I didn't know how to. So I daydream, and I never learned how to come back to the present moment. It's not that difficult. It's just to say, oh, I'm thinking about this, and I come back to my breath. I come back to what I'm doing. So mindfulness is to meditate with who you were with or what you are doing. There's a less emotional reactivity. There's cognitive flexibility. Today I look at this at a very deep level. And this happens for a lot of people as we get older. We get cognitively not impaired, but stuck. Stuck on old ideas. Stuck on the way it used to be. Mindless ways of being. I'm not saying you do that, but I think it's easy to happen. But this is a different group. You're in a class like this. You're trying to open your mind and your heart. But recognize that how often in our society we see things as either it's a not duality. We see things as a duality. It's either this or that. Can't you see that in every part of our society today? In Washington and in every place we go, it's my way or this way or that way. But it's not. We have to come to a non-duality. Non-duality is what mystics, people who are truly mentally healthy have. They're not bound by their point of view. They're believing, oh, there might be another point of view. Wouldn't it be nice if we could get together with those people we differ with and just sit down and say, you know, this is what I feel. What are you feeling? What is going on in your life? This is something I've been trying to do, and I think it can work. But can we sit down with those people that have drastically different views? Wouldn't that be helpful? It would be a wonderful thing that we could do. So just think, these are some things. And we know that people that are mindful, wouldn't it be nice to be present with those you love all the time? The best gift you give another is your presence. And how many times do we have people now on their cell phones or on their iPads, and they're in the same room, but they're not talking to each other? They're not connected with one another because they have other things to do. I used to teach students when they were on campus that they're walking, 2 or 3 of them together are walking away from class, and each of them are texting somebody on their cell phone. So they're in about 6 different conversations at that time, and they're not even enjoying each other. They're all over the place, not really present for one another. Well, it's not that different with us as we get older. Mindfulness makes up the fabrics of our lives. These are the moments that we remember. If you think about it, I came up with this idea that this is such an important concept. Over 30 years ago, when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she taught, remember her on Death and Dying? Everybody heard of her in our generation somewhere along the line. If you had a loved one die, to tell you about the stages that you're going through and all these kind of things. Well, she worked with all these dying people, and she said at the end of one's life, people don't talk about homes or cars. In fact, I remember she said, you never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. But the point is, she said, what we remember are moments. That's it. So 3 weeks ago now, I sat with a woman that I did a memorial service for at Capitol Manor last Sunday. And she said, I have no regrets. And she said, and she talked about her family and what it meant to her. And she had everything. She traveled all around the world. She did everything. But it wasn't about the trips even. It was how she connected with her family. And that was important. And then she said, Jerry, tell me, what was that meditation we used to do in the meditation group that she attended 10 years earlier? She stopped attending because her health wasn't so good. And I couldn't remember. We do so many of them. I'll share a few with you today. And she said, a moment later, she said, present moment, wonderful moment. And I said, that's perfect for you. That is your mantra. You keep repeating that as you breathe, and you will die peacefully. She did a day later. Present moment, wonderful moment. If we can learn to live that way, these moments are really important. Now, how do we create moments? The moments that you remember, and I won't go through and ask you about your moments, but they're usually big events, but sometimes they're small events. Our body is involved. You can think about this physically or negatively. Our body is involved, our feelings are involved, our perceptions, our thoughts are involved. We thought about it. We created a mental formation. A mental formation is a story. So you have these happening all the time. When something happens to your body or something happens with another person, with a feeling, with your thinking, your perceptions, it influences what we call as a story. So in the middle of the night, you all have these. This is a term you could use to identify if you start to spin a story around and you keep repeating that story, and you repeat it over and over again. Remember, if you linger too long on it, it's a negative story. It's affecting neuroplasticity of your brain. And so that is something to think about. And then consciousness, well, that's such a big topic. I can't even start to get into it. But consciousness of what we are aware of right now is our mind. What you're aware of in this room right now is your mind consciousness. And your store consciousness is everything beneath that. I'll share that with you in a moment. A couple months ago, I gave a TED Talk, and I talked about this is it. I have to review these notes for myself. This is it. This is a concept related to this moment is right now. It is a sign they have at a monastery, a Buddhist monastery in Escondido. That's the only sign they have on the wall. This is it. It's a very valuable message. I tried to remind my friend that died recently that this is it. This moment is it. Well, moments every day, according to Daniel Kahneman, we have about 20,000 moments a day. You're not aware of it. Some are positive, some are negative. Most of them are neutral. You don't remember the neutral ones, but you certainly remember the negative ones because they stick like Velcro. and the positive ones kind of slide off, but you still remember them more than the neutral ones. Neutral ones, just hum, hum, hum. But made me realize that there's certain things I can do to create more beautiful moments, like linger longer, like I already start to say, and I'm going to say it 3 or 4 more times if you don't get sick of it. I'm going to linger longer on the linger longer concept so that you remember it. But this is it. So this is a calligraphy done by Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. So a few years ago, a good friend of mine died, and he just had stage 4 cancer for 7 years. And he died, and the doctors were always amazed. How could he live that long? Well, I got to know him quite well, and he said that mindfulness was the best medicine. He had all the chemo, he had all the radiation, he had the whole works. But when you can't control anymore, what can you control? You can control this moment. You can control where you go in this moment. And he would use it when he was going in for radiation to see that that radiation was working properly, not thinking about how bad he is or how bad it could be. But he tried to keep on focusing on the present moment. This is it. And he also said something that became very important to me and how I want to live my life. And I have seen his columbarium at the Willamette National Cemetery because he's a vet. And he has a simple inscription, I have no regrets. And wouldn't it be nice if we could live our life that way? I have no regrets. I'm living so fully. Well, the answer to living fully is to be mindful. If I'm mindless, I'm not in the moment, and I can't experience it. I'm not deeply invested in this moment. So this is it. Mindfulness is a seed. Do I have a few more minutes? Am I supposed to end at a certain time to take a break? Well, give me 5, and then I'll finish this, and then I understand we take a little break, and then we come back, and the latter part is going to be a Q&A and a discussion on techniques. Is that okay? Okay, good. So mindfulness is a seed. Think about it. What do you have to do with a seed? You have to nurture it. You have to water it. You have to put good fertilizer around it. You have to take care of it. So I like the concept a lot. And how do we water the seed of mindfulness? If you want to become more mindful, you can start doing it any moment by coming back to the moment. So if I'm talking to one person, my mind wanders, I come back to that person. If I'm working on a project and I start to want to surf the web, I stay working on that project. Where is my mind now? Where have I gone with this? So I want to learn to come back. And that's not easy to do because it takes a lot of practice. Because we've been habituated to be mindless, to go wherever other things are going, to let our mind get carried away, and to miss exactly what's going on. What's difficult is to remember to be mindful. We all have, this is a habit energy we want to develop, a habit energy of mindfulness. So I'm going to give you some of those qualities here. Now, I said it's a seed, and I talked about mind and store. Now, there's a very important concept. Every time anything is noted, tell me something you noted. Somebody said the flowers. Did you go by the Capitol? Are they? I have to take pictures the next day or so because I know they're going to be starting to drop. I love to take pictures this time of the year. Anyways, whatever it is that drew your attention, it was there in your mind consciousness. But also it triggers a memory in your store consciousness. You remember other flowers. You remember other beautiful things. Or it could be music, right? Don't you love Oliver Sacks' research? Oliver Sacks talks about brain worms. And the idea, if you hear beautiful music, it creates a brain worm, and you can't get it out of your mind. And you could hear a song. Remember, well, do you remember the Beatles? I remember going to bars in Wisconsin and dancing in the 60s, right? That tells you how old I am. And it was a great time, but whenever I hear that song again, I go right back to it because it triggers something in here, something good, and brings a smile to my face. Oliver Sacks, he died last year. He did a thing at the Schnitz a couple years ago, but he talked about the research on music and what a difference that makes, and how music can create this worm that it's not dangerous. We can't get it out of our head. It's just like and there's things like that, positive and negative. That's the sad part, positive things. But what if it's a negative thing? What if it's the vet that I talked about? And every time, I remember I was with him in France at a retreat, and a helicopter went over. He jumped down on the ground. That helicopter he remembered from Vietnam. There's no problem in France. It was pretty safe where we were. We were at a Buddhist monastery. Nothing to worry about. But I didn't have that orientation, so I think, no, I'm surprised. So I always say, everybody carries a heavy burden. And don't be surprised if somebody reacts to something. What we have to learn to do is have a compassionate, mindful heart where we're open to whatever that reaction is and not judge them. Because the quality of mindfulness, again, is non-judgmental, present awareness, and add compassion to it, which is the Dalai Lama's favorite remedy for everything. If people learn compassion, what a difference it would make. We have compassion programs in the schools, and I'm sure Betty taught this at the Oregon State Prison when working with prisoners. Compassion was her key word. And I'm sure she could tell stories about how inmates who have been traumatized. Just think about the trauma. I communicate with one inmate who's in life, is a lifer, and he's about 55 years old now, and he's been in prison since 20. He escaped 3 times. And so he's in maximum security in Eastern Oregon. But he tells me about how it is in this little cell where there's maybe 20 other inmates in the cubicle. Do you think they're saying, God bless you, sleep well, may all be well? It's every profanity under the sun all night long. It's negative. How does that influence our consciousness? It'd be like this little girl who grew up with their parents arguing time and time again. The longer that seed stays alive in our mind consciousness, it's strengthened in the store consciousness. This is the whole premise of the book I wrote, The Seeds of Love. What you nurture is what you become. And so we need to understand this as it relates to, we're all gardeners. Oh, I just like that little plant. It's just nurturing. Somebody gave me some kale starts, and I'm waiting for the grass, the mud to dry in our garden before I put them in. But that's how I handle them, very gently. And this is how we need to handle and be compassionate with ourselves with each moment, to hold it in our heart, in our souls, so that we can truly experience it. And so mindfulness is a seed. I mentioned that. I'm going to go ahead. You've heard this story. The grandmother said, there are 2 wolves inside of me, the wolf of peace and the wolf of anger. Her granddaughter asked, which one wins? The one I feed. That's one of my favorites. You probably heard it by now, but which one wins? A little granddaughter even realized that, is she going to feed which wolf? Which emotion is she going to feed? Cultivating mindfulness to create a beautiful life. I think that's a good place to stop, to take a little break, to get energized. Does somebody want to teach us yoga or something when we get back, or something to keep us? I'm just getting warmed up. Thank you. Just take a couple in-breaths and focus on the in-breath And just allow the out-breath to go out naturally. Just focus on the in-breath to inspire yourself. A longer in-breath than an out-breath. So when we breathe, and I'll talk just a little bit about it, but you can't help and talk about mindfulness without connecting the breath to whatever we do. It's become my friend. I always like the derivation of the word inspiration. There's something spiritual about that, right? We're bringing in the Spirit or bringing in God or the divine or whatever words you like to call it. But there's something about that that is quite beautiful. Based on the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, I came up with 3 key words that are very important. One is stop. Remember the Sabbath in the old days? Do you remember Shabbat? Do you remember Saturdays or Sundays, or depending upon if you have any religious preference? Remember when people used to really stop? It's not happening too often. It's a lost art. We call it in our household a lazy day, where we don't tune into, I can't say we're always good at this, but try at least a half a day of not being tuned into the internet and social media or whatever else we get tuned into so easily. But stopping can be very, very important. The stops that we take during the day. You see yourself going from one event to another. That can be mindless, the hurriedness about that. So we find little ways of stopping. And this is what I attempt to do when we have retreats. We bring people to a monastery, or we bring people to just for a couple days or a day. We have once a month at the Trappist Abbey a secular, what I'm starting to do now are secular days of mindfulness. Because we don't want to call it based on anything, but anyone, any religion, atheist or not, or others, can buy into it, because there's nothing wrong with stopping. And when we stop, a lot of things come up. But as a group of therapists that I know that regularly come to the Trappist Abbey once a month to stop, they say it's their best therapy, because they're bombarded all the time by all these. Think about the things that have bombarded you in your life, and how did you diffuse? What methods did you use to be able to let go of the daily kind of work, maybe in healthcare, maybe in education, maybe in whatever you did. But we all can relate to how these things take us down a path, and it's not always very renewing. And breathing then is a key component of that, and then calming. What are we calming? Our body and our mind. If we stop, that helps to calm our body and mind. If we're going, we're always engaged in something. So there's a balance that we have to maintain in our life to be able to do that. So I said I would talk for maybe about 15 more minutes, give a few strategies. Maybe that's all you should have on your to-do list. Breathe in, breathe out. You know you're having a good day if you can put that on your list and you don't have anything else to do. For me today was, I can't tell you how many things were on my to-do list. Hopefully I had some breathing in between. That helped me. So that's a good recipe. When I had that anxiety, when I was having chest pain, this doctor said, you ought to try some stuff. He was doing some research with us on type A behavior. He said, you ought to try some of the stuff you teach other people. Like breathing a little bit. I said, thank you. That was a wake-up call. One of my favorites just came out the last couple years. Look it up. You'd see that as little as 10 conscious breaths. I start every day about 4:30. And it's not because I can't sleep. I go to bed around 8:30, 9 o'clock. I call it monastery hours. Get up around 4:30, and I start the day with a cup of coffee, and I sit by the fire this time of the year. My dog and wife are still sleeping for another hour, and I start just to follow my breath. I have a mala, and I just do this. Breathing in, breathing out. And I continue to come back to my breath. Meditation isn't that sophisticated. We make too big of a deal. All we need to do is just be aware of our breathing, be aware of our in-breath and our out-breath. Well, they found that 10 breaths actually can rewire the neuroplasticity of the brain in healthy ways. So if we can consciously take 10 breaths, we're making a difference. Another thing that I have a fondness in are bells. Bells of mindfulness. I'll show you a little demonstration. This can be used with children. I have teachers now using it in the classroom, these bells, and you could say it's Buddhist, you could say it's Christian, you could say it's nothing. It's just a bell. Don't get caught on what it may represent. I grew up as a Catholic, and we'd have bells all the time. Angelus and different bells meant different things. Same thing in monasteries today. As I traveled to different parts of the world, I saw that bells are used all over universally as a time to stop, often a time to pray, often a time to reflect. But you don't have to pray. You don't have to do any of those things. If you just stop, that can make a big difference. And so I call it the bell of mindfulness. So I wake up the bell. Smile to it. And just breathe with me, just a breath or two. If you feel tired, focus on inhalation. If you want to sleep, focus on exhalation. Whatever it is. It's very helpful at night. You want to focus on your breath. Your mind is going in 1,000 directions. But we can come back to what is happening. Most common problem, people in your age group, they can't get back to sleep. Can't get back to sleep because they're worried about something, thinking about something else. They may have pain, but most of their worries are emotional related things that are going on. The bell of mindfulness. Well, that didn't come out right. That's a little girl inviting a bell.
Listen till the sound stops.
Okay, ready?
Well, it's a 2-year-old. I'm sorry, that was right on my computer. Maybe when it came into the system, it just changed. There's some people I know, they are full-time grandparents, if you know what I mean. They're very engaged. And they're often spending time with their grandchildren, so they started doing some meditation. They learned about bells, and instead of bringing this bell to the kids' home, with the 2 kids, their kids, grandchildren, and just start doing the bell. And it's so surprising. She sat there quietly, at best a 2-year-old is able to, and just enjoy her breathing. I found that at all ages we can really embrace that. I'll tell you a story about this. I was teaching at Western Oregon, had a lot of deaf students. So I would use the bell, and I would ask people, well, do you have bells of mindfulness in your life? So bells are not just a bell, right? Bells, if you can't hear a bell, what else could be a bell of mindfulness? A bell of mindfulness is just an invitation to stop, to breathe, to calm ourselves. So, the story goes like this. Asked class, I invited the bell, and then after that, I asked the class, what are your bells, real bells or other bells of mindfulness in your life? And one deaf student said, my bell, through interpretation, my bell is my baby. Every time I hold her, I feel that love, I feel peaceful. It's a bell of mindfulness for her. Fast forward, 12 years, and it was later, a couple months ago, I was in Costco doing some shopping. I run into this student who I looked like I knew, and she was waving to me. She was the deaf student, and her daughter is about as tall as she is. And they ran toward me, and she was telling her daughter that this was my professor. And they still use the bell in their home. 12 years later. She just learned that in a class about a bell and how they can stop. And it was just such a surprise. One never knows what we bring into our life. And the best bet is you can be a bell of mindfulness. I always say that each person is a bell of mindfulness. If when we're with them, we just feel more peaceful. As Maya Angelou said, it's not what we say or do, it's how we feel after when we're with them. So if you're peaceful, if you're calm, you're relaxed, you are practicing mindfulness, and you can be that bell of mindfulness, which can help the other person and can be generational. We have intergenerational trauma. I would like to create intergenerational mindfulness. So people are carrying this on. Our job at this stage of our life is to pass on what we know in the best way possible. That's why you're in this class. You're learning new things that you can share with your grandchildren, with your children, with your adult children, with people in your life. But the best thing you share is your presence. And that is cultivated. You know how you feel when you're with somebody that really cares about you and loves you and you felt heard and they listen to you. That is what this is all about. Being present. I am here for you. I have a whole set of mantras that we can use for others. I'll just teach two right now. I am here for you. Now, you're not going to say that to your friend. Thank you. Well, that's so nice of you. Did you go across the street? Did you go mindfully? What is your name? Mark? Thanks, Mark. It's my son's name. Thanks a lot. The first mantra, I am here for you. You don't have to say it, just be it. You're just really present for another person. If you've ever had a good therapist, you know they were there. They were really present for you. Can you do that with a clerk at a store, with a homeless person who's asking for money? Can you keep your heart open when you close off? Can you keep your heart open to whatever is happening, the full catastrophe of life, by being present? And the second thing, the second mantra is, I recognize you. I see you. Isn't it true? We all want to be seen. You come here because you want to learn. But another thing is, you want to show up for life. You want to be recognized as somebody who's learning and doing. I am here for you, and I recognize you. I see you. I see you, and I remember you, or I connect with you, whatever that means. These are two very good mindfulness strategies. This is the story behind this, is creating a safe refuge. We need to find a refuge in ourselves. A place we can go when things are tumultuous, when the news is bad, when things are not right in our families, in our own minds, in our life. We need to find a refuge. Do all of you have a refuge, a place that you can go? Tell me that place. Anybody have an example? Okay, you got a place in the mountains. Give me another one. The beach. Okay. You all have one? No, no place? Think of a place. A place that when you're there, you're really at home. Home. I have arrived. You know what your address should be? I have arrived. I am home in the here and now. You're always home. How can you be home when you're not home? But a refuge. So, this is based on work, and I'm not going to talk about trauma now. I'm going to talk about my friend Ann Martin. She used to teach at Western Solvay. She was a counselor, and she would teach this to students. And I've learned this from other people. She goes around to countries where I mentioned earlier, where they've had trauma and war. And she taught me this, but I learned about it through the trauma work, EMDR, eye movement desensitization regulation. But it's about, so thinking about, so imagine she works with these children. I can't remember exactly what African country that was. And they have all experienced a lot of war-related trauma. So she goes into the schools and teaches the counselors how to help them stabilize themselves. Because when our mind is not stable, we can't learn. When your mind is not focused, when you're not equanimous, when you're up and down and always going for something else and not living in the present moment, you can't learn. You can't experience the present moment. You can't really concentrate on what is happening. So we want to find a refuge. You can do this in the middle of the night. I've used this. So it's tapping. And give yourself a butterfly hug if you want to do it. If you don't want to do it, it's okay. It's not going to hurt you. No one's ever been hurt by the butterfly hug. So what you do is you just tap and think about the refuge. I have a place on the beach. My wife and I go. It's a bench outside of Depot Bay where we watch the whales. I call it our own beachfront property. It's a public beach. It has an inscription on it by somebody that died that donated it to them. And I think about that place, and I think about how relaxing it is. Butterfly hug. It's just a way, and what we're doing is reconditioning our right and left side of our brain to really focus. Another is to linger longer. This is a picture I took of the super moon. Remember was it December? Remember the super moon? Oh, my wife, Kathleen, called me, Jerry, it's here. I thought it was a package I was waiting for. No, it was a super moon. And so we went outside, and I got my camera, and I got my tripod, and I set it up. And that moon was so beautiful. I guess we won't see another super moon in our life. It was quite outstanding, right? Lester, I don't know how often that happens. But the super moon. So that's an example of lingered longer. I think we lingered on that moon for 30 minutes. And it's ingrained in my consciousness. And if we can do that same thing with other things, we can certainly make a difference. Another is embrace and replace. I think Buddha was the first psychologist. Psychology friends of mine say that. Because he developed all these models about the mind and thinking and thoughts and all those different ideas. So in the time of the Buddha, the monks would go out and meditate outside. I was into some of these spots in India when we took 24 students on the footsteps of the Buddha. And we would meditate at night, meditate in these places. It gets kind of scary. And the monks were afraid, and they came in to the Buddha the next day, and they said, Buddha, how can we not be so afraid? Because we hear all these noises in the forest at night. And he said the best antidote for fear is love. So he taught a type of meditation called loving kindness meditation. If we have time, I'll teach it later. But it's called metta. So instead of focusing on fear, we focus on love. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be free from suffering. You think about people in your life. And you send them loving kindness from your heart. So you overcome the fear with love. We need antidotes to fear. And the best, I think, is truly love. But before we get to love, you notice it as fear. Never push anything away because it is there for a reason. Fear is healthy, necessary. Yet, if you're fearful all night long, you're not going to sleep. And remember, you're lingering too long on a feeling that is not necessary for what is going on at that moment. Fear is necessary if a car is coming and I'm crossing over to go to get my car at the Mission Mill and I have to jump out of the way. Fear is good. That's why we have it, fight or flight. But it's not good when we are afraid of things that have happened. Why did I say it that way? Why did I do this or that? That kind of fear is not productive. So we have to figure out those negative types of reactions that we have and replace it with something more positive. In this new book by the Dalai Lama, I love this. A researcher by Lumbursky says, you change your perspective. Our greatest influence on our happiness is our ability to change our perspective toward life, our ability to reframe our situation more positively. I call this equanimity, equanimous. If I can get to the top of a mountain, I can see all sides. Wouldn't it be nice if we could see all different perspectives and not be bound by one of them? Wouldn't it be nice if in those people we love, we wouldn't be bound by this way or that way? We would be open. We would offer them the freedom of our equanimity so that they could be free to be where they are. But one thing we definitely need to do in our lives and in our world, and if we can't do it as a group of people, no one's going to do it. Washington and other parts of the world are a reflection on all of us. And if we can't learn to share deeply and be able to change perspectives to see what is really going on in our life, we will always be stuck by one idea, one ideology. First one must change. I first watch myself, check myself, and then expect change from others. Can't change others, but I can change myself. I can be more mindful. I can be more calm. I can be more relaxed. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit. You can all relate to the problem of negativity bias. This Rick Hansen, he has done some really good research. But we all know that we have a negativity bias because we're hardwired for that bias. We're hardwired to react when there's a fear coming up because we understand that it's something that we need to do to protect ourselves. This negativity shows up in a lot of ways. And so what we are looking to do here is not get into this stimulus response. Give you an example of how this has been found out to be in couples relationship. A person by the name of John Gottman has a lab at the University of Washington. He studies couples, and he studies their communication and their relationship. And he has found that it takes, for every negative event, it takes 5 positives to counteract it. It's pretty tough, isn't it? But those that are always negative, if they're arguing all the time, it's negative all the time, it's not going to work because you're watering the wrong seeds. We have a negativity bias. We have to work very hard at changing that. But it changes for me when I find that I hang around with people that are like-minded, like in this group, I'm sure, with people that have a path to want to grow and learn. They tend to be able to be more able to change. And so that 5-to-1 ratio, to me, always sticks in my mind. So if you have a traumatic event, you got to really work hard to be able to, I'll say a small t, not major trauma, just a small t, an argument with somebody. How are you going to recoup that? And what does that do to the brain? Well, here I talk about that negativity bias. And here's what he would suggest we do. Look for good facts about the world and yourself. Experience good things. So, what is it that's good? Think about what you like, what you love, what nurtures you. Music, right? Music. A lot of you love music. Solveig, music. How you share that with so many people. How that brings so much joy and happiness to people's lives. You may not think about it, but what you do, your presence, the music of your life is your being. And to find time with those good things. Savor the good experiences for 10 to 30 seconds. That's what it means by lingering longer. Don't run away from it. See something beautiful? Get another person and watch it. Watch the sunset. Or just see the sun, right? Or whatever. We've been deprived this winter. Sense that is filling your body. Identify, intensify, and you will really enjoy it. Make it last. In other words, whatever you're doing in life, try to make it last. A few things here, and then I'll start some questions. Good to remember, be with difficulties, difficult materials, things that come up. Don't try to push it away. We all have these things, but I think we unconsciously try to keep busy, that when difficulties come up, we change the subject, change the channel, usually TV or something else, to get ourselves away, do something mind-numbing, to get ourselves away from what is really happening. Release it and let go. You can't release it until you identify it and are aware of it, and replace it with something more beneficial. So it's this process all the time. Negativity comes up, we identify it, we embrace it, we replace it, and then we're able to let go of it. There's a sign I saw outside of a tunnel. I can't remember if it was in Utah or in a national park somewhere. You see a ball of light at the end, and the sign read, "The only way out is through." Got to get through it. I often hesitate. Am I going to go through that mile-long tunnel? There's a tunnel. My daughter lives in Geneva, Switzerland. Outside of there, going through the Alps, it's about 15 miles long. Oh my goodness, they've had more deaths in there and trucks turning over and all kinds of things. I get these worst-case scenarios. And you can't even see the end of the tunnel, but I know the only way out, if we're going to go over to have lunch in Italy, got to go through the tunnel, right? So it's just a good metaphor for life. Let's see if there's any. There's too much here. Let me see if there's anything else that I want to do. Here are some reminders. I'm not going to cover those. Let's have some questions. Let's have some reactions, some thoughts, and then we'll call it a day. I think we have a good plan. I got to sit down a little bit. Anything you've been thinking about? Anything that energized you? Anything that you can practice? If I had to say what you might want to practice, some things. But anything you would like to say from the groups I work with? Everyone I work with, I learn something from. So two people have microphones right now. Let's begin. Oh, are you handing them out?
Hi. Okay, I think I have the first. I'm over here.
Question. Okay, yes. What is your name?
My name's Cassia.
Cecile?
Cassia. Don't worry about it. Everybody gets it wrong. The question seems to be that there is an inherent, to me,